The Queen Consort wanted him gone by morning. No explanation. No hearing. Just gone. The guard had been standing in the wrong corridor at the wrong time. Or maybe the right time, depending on how you looked at it. King Charles asked to see the footage. First, she told him there was no need, but he watched it anyway, and what he saw changed everything. The guard's name was Thomas Brennan, 34 years old. 9 years of service, quiet, professional, the kind of man who knew when to look away. That Tuesday morning, he'd been assigned to the East Wing, 3rd floor, a rotation he'd done 100 times before. Nothing special about it. He took his position at 6 a.m., just as the palace was waking. The chandeliers still dim, the air cold and still. By 6:15, his life had ended. Not literally, but close enough. The Queen Consort had been walking alone. Unusual for that hour. Usually there were attendants, ladies in waiting, someone, but not that morning. She came down the corridor quickly, her heels sharp against the marble. Her face, Thomas would later describe it as pale, tight, like she was holding something in. He nodded, a small acknowledgement, professional. She didn't look at him. She passed, and Thomas turned his head, just slightly, just enough to see where she was going. That was his mistake. She stopped, turned. "Were you watching me?" Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Thomas straightened. "No, ma'am. Just maintaining awareness of the corridor." "You turned your head. Standard protocol, ma'am." She stared at him, long enough that his pulse began to quicken. "What's your name?" "Brennan, ma'am." "Thomas Brennan." She didn't say anything else, just looked at him like she was committing his face to memory. Then she walked away. Thomas didn't think much of it. Royal family members could be particular. He'd learned that early. You nodded, you answered, you forgot about it. But by 9 a.m., his supervisor was pulling him aside. "You're being reassigned. To where?" "Effective immediately. You're off rotation." Thomas blinked. "I don't understand." "Neither do I. Orders came from upstairs." Upstairs meant the private offices, the ones that handled personnel on behalf of the family. "Did I do something wrong?" His supervisor looked uncomfortable. "I wasn't given details. Just go home. Wait for contact." Thomas stood there, still in uniform, trying to process what was happening. "Can I ask, go home, Brennan?" So he did. He walked out of the palace that morning not understanding what he'd done, not understanding why his hands were shaking. By that afternoon, the letter arrived. Termination of service. Effective immediately. No cause given. No hearing. No appeal. Just gone. If you're finding this story gripping, a quick subscribe really helps us keep sharing these kinds of hidden moments. We don't ask often, but it means a lot. Thomas read the letter 3 times. 9 years, gone. He called his supervisor. No answer. He called the personnel office. They told him the decision was final. On whose authority? I'm not at liberty to say. But Thomas already knew. He'd seen her face that morning. The way she'd stopped. The way she'd looked at him. Like he'd seen something he wasn't supposed to. And maybe he had. Because when King Charles requested the security footage later that week, what he saw on the screen made him sit very, very still. King Charles didn't usually review security footage himself. That wasn't his role. There were people for that. Entire departments. But when he'd been told about the dismissal casually over breakfast by his private secretary, something had felt off. The guard from the East Wing. "Yes, sir. Terminated yesterday. On what grounds?" A pause. The request came from Her Majesty. Charles had set down his tea. Which Majesty? The secretary had looked uncomfortable. "The Queen Consort, sir." Charles had nodded slowly. Said nothing. But later that afternoon, he made the call. "I'd like to see the footage from Tuesday morning. East Wing, 3rd floor." There was hesitation on the other end. "May I ask what this is regarding, sir?" "You may not." The footage arrived within the hour. Charles watched it alone in his study. The door closed. No attendants. The timestamp reads 6:14 a.m. The corridor was empty. Then the Queen Consort entered the frame from the left. Walking quickly, alone, Charles leaned forward slightly. She wasn't just walking. She was coming from somewhere. He rewound. Watched again. Her expression was sharp, focused, the way she looked when something had gone wrong, and she was trying to manage it before anyone noticed. He knew that look. At 6:15, she reached the guard. Thomas Brennan, according to the file. The guard nodded. Professional, appropriate. She passed him. Then stopped, turned. Charles watched her speak. He couldn't hear the audio, it hadn't been recorded in that section, but he could read her body language. Stiff, defensive. The guard answered. Brief, respectful. She stared at him, then walked away. Charles paused the footage. That was it? That was the incident that had gotten a 9-year veteran dismissed. He sat back in his chair. It didn't make sense. Unless he rewound the footage again. This time, he went back further. To 6:10 a.m., the corridor was empty. 6:11, still empty. 6:12, a door opened, small, unremarkable, the kind of service door that staff used. Cleaning supplies, storage. The Queen Consort stepped out. Alone, Charles froze the frame. She smoothed her jacket, glanced down the corridor, then walked quickly toward the main hall, toward where the guard had been stationed. Charles stared at the screen. Why had she been in the storage room at 6 a.m.? He checked the file. That door led to a secondary stairwell, one that connected to the lower floors, the private quarters, the guest wing. Charles felt something cold settle in his chest. He didn't want to think about what that might mean, but he couldn't stop himself. He picked up the phone. I need the guest logs for this week. Who's staying in the West Wing? A pause, then the answer came. One name, a name Charles recognized. Someone who had no business being in the palace at 6 a.m. alone with his wife. Charles ended the call. He sat very still. The guard hadn't done anything wrong. He'd just been standing in the wrong place, at the wrong time, and he'd turned his head. That was all. But it was enough. Because if the guard had seen her come out of that door, if he'd put the pieces together, if he'd said something, Charles understood now. The dismissal hadn't been about protocol. It had been about silence. And the guard, Thomas Brennan, had been removed not because he'd done something, but because he might have seen something. Charles didn't confront her immediately. That wasn't his way. He'd learned long ago that timing mattered. That silence could reveal more than questions. So he waited. 2 days. He watched her at breakfast, at public events, in the quiet moments between obligations. She seemed normal, composed, the same woman she'd always been. But he couldn't unsee the footage. The door, the stairwell, the way she'd looked when she came out. On Thursday evening, he found his moment. They were alone in the drawing room. A rare occurrence. Usually there were others, staff, advisors, but tonight it was just them. She was reading, or pretending to. I reviewed some footage this week, Charles said quietly. She didn't look up. Oh? From Tuesday morning. Her hand paused on the page. Just for a second. I wasn't aware you concerned yourself with security matters. I don't, usually. She turned the page. Then why now? I was curious about the guard. Which guard? The one you had dismissed. She set the book down slowly. Met his eyes. He was inappropriate. Was he? He was watching me. Following me with his eyes. I saw the footage, Charles said. He turned his head, once. That's all. It made me uncomfortable. Or it made you nervous. The air in the room changed. She stood. Smoothed her dress. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm asking. Asking what exactly? Charles stood as well. His voice remained calm, low. Why were you coming out of a storage room at 6 a.m.? She didn't flinch. Didn't look away. I was looking for something. In a storage room? I'd been told there were old documents, archives. I was curious. At 6 a.m.? I couldn't sleep. Charles nodded slowly. And the guest in the West Wing? Her jaw tightened. Just slightly. What about him? Does he also have trouble sleeping? You're being ridiculous. Am I? She stepped closer. Her voice dropped. You're inventing conspiracies where there are none. I was looking for documents. The guard made me uncomfortable. I requested his removal. That's all. You didn't request his removal. You demanded it. You bypassed protocol. You had him escorted out within hours. Because I didn't feel safe. You didn't feel safe, Charles repeated. From a man who served this family for 9 years without incident. She said nothing. Or you didn't feel safe because he might have seen something. This is absurd. Then prove it. She stared at him. Prove what? Prove there's nothing to hide. I don't need to prove anything to you. The words hung between them. Charles felt something shift. Something that couldn't be taken back. No, he said quietly. I suppose you don't. He turned to leave. Charles. He stopped. What are you going to do? He didn't turn around. I'm going to reinstate the guard. You can't. I can. And I will. He saw nothing. There's nothing to see. Then you have nothing to worry about. He walked out. Behind him, he heard her say something. Too quiet to make out. But he didn't need to hear it. He already knew. The next morning, Thomas Brennan received a call. Mr. Brennan? This is the Palace Personnel Office. We'd like to discuss your reinstatement. Thomas had been sitting in his flat, staring at nothing, trying to figure out what to do next. My what? Your reinstatement. Effective immediately. Full back pay. The previous termination has been rescinded. Thomas couldn't speak. Mr. Brennan? Yes, I'm here. Can you report Monday morning? Yes, of course. When he hung up, his hands were shaking again. But this time, it wasn't from fear. It was something else, relief, confusion, and a quiet, growing certainty that whatever had happened that Tuesday morning, whatever he'd almost seen, it was bigger than he'd realized. Thomas reported Monday morning at 6 a.m., the same time he'd been dismissed. He wore his uniform, pressed, polished, professional, but walking through those doors felt different now. Everyone knew. Not the details, but enough. A guard dismissed, then reinstated within a week. By order of the king himself. That didn't happen. Not unless something was wrong. Thomas was assigned to the South Wing, different corridor, different floor, far from where he'd been that Tuesday. His supervisor handed him the assignment without meeting his eyes. Brennan, sir, keep your head down. Thomas nodded. He understood. Whatever had happened, whatever had almost surfaced, it needed to stay buried. For everyone's sake. The first few days passed quietly. Thomas did his job, stood his post, didn't ask questions, but he felt it. The weight of eyes on him. Staff members who glanced away when he looked up. Colleagues who suddenly had nothing to say. And once, just once, he saw her. The Queen Consort. She was walking through the main hall with attendants, heading to some function. She didn't look at him, but he knew she'd seen him. Her shoulders had stiffened, just slightly. Thomas kept his eyes forward. He didn't turn his head. Not this time. By the end of the week, something changed. A senior guard pulled him aside. Someone Thomas had known for years. You should leave, Thomas frowned. What? The palace. This job. You should leave. I was just reinstated. I know. And that's exactly why you should go. The man looked around, made sure they were alone. You're in the middle of something, Brennan. I don't know what, but I know enough to tell you people who get caught in the middle don't last. I didn't do anything. I know. That's what worries me. Thomas stared at him. Think about it, the man said. Just think about it. He walked away. Thomas stood there. He'd spent 9 years building this career, this life, and now someone was telling him to throw it away because he'd been in the wrong corridor at the wrong time. That night, Thomas sat in his flat and thought about what the guard had said. About the footage. About the dismissal. About the sudden reinstatement. None of it made sense, unless the king had seen something. Unless the king knew. And if the king knew, then Thomas wasn't safe. He was a reminder. A witness. Even if he hadn't actually witnessed anything. Thomas opened his laptop. He started searching. Job listings. Private security. Anything outside the palace. He didn't want to leave. But staying felt dangerous. Like standing too close to something that could collapse at any moment. The next morning, Thomas submitted his resignation. 2 weeks' notice. Standard protocol. His supervisor looked relieved. "You sure about this?" "Yes, sir. Can I ask why?" Thomas hesitated. "Personal reasons." The supervisor nodded. "Didn't push. For what it's worth, Brennan, you're a good guard. One of the best." Thomas nodded. Didn't trust himself to speak. When word reached King Charles, he didn't react. He simply asked, "Has he been reassigned for his remaining time?" "Yes, sir." "Minimal visibility. Low traffic areas. Good." Charles set down the report. He'd done what he could. Reinstated the man. Given him his dignity back. But he couldn't protect him from the attention. The questions. The silent pressure that came from being too close to something unspeakable. Sometimes Charles thought mercy looked like letting someone go. Even if it meant they'd never know the full truth. Even if it meant carrying the weight alone. On Thomas's last day, he walked out of the palace at 4 p.m. The sun was still out. The air warm. He turned back once. Looked at the building. The stone. The history. 9 years. He'd given 9 years. And he still didn't know what he'd almost seen. Maybe that was better. Maybe not knowing was the only thing that had saved him. He turned away. And as he walked, he didn't notice the figure watching from an upper window. King Charles stood behind the glass, watching the guard leave, knowing that this was the right thing. The only thing. Even if it felt like losing. The guest left 3 days after Thomas resigned, quietly, early morning. No formal farewell. Charles was told at breakfast. "He's departed, sir." "Has he?" It wasn't a question. Charles set down his paper. Looked out the window. The Queen Consort hadn't been at breakfast. She'd sent word she was unwell. She'd been unwell for several days now. Charles didn't push. He let the silence grow. Because silence, he'd learned, had a way of forcing truth to the surface. And the truth was coming. He could feel it. That afternoon, his private secretary brought him a letter. Sealed, unmarked. "This arrived for you, sir," hand-delivered. Charles took it. Dismissed the man. He waited until he was alone. Then opened it. The handwriting was unfamiliar. Careful, precise. "Your Majesty, I don't know if this letter will reach you. I don't know if it should. But I wanted you to know that I saw nothing. Whatever you think I saw, whatever she thinks I saw, I didn't. I was doing my job. That's all. I know why I was dismissed. And I know why I was reinstated. I'm grateful. But I'm also afraid. Not of losing my position again. I've already resigned. I'm afraid of what it means that a man can be erased for standing in the wrong corridor. I'm afraid of what I didn't see. Because if nothing happened, why was I removed? And if something did happen, why am I the one who had to leave? I don't expect an answer. I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know. I was loyal. I am loyal. Even now." Thomas Brennan Charles read the letter twice. Then folded it carefully. Placed it in his desk drawer. Locked it. He sat very still for a long time. The guard was right. If nothing had happened, none of this would have been necessary. And if something had... Charles closed his eyes. He didn't want to know. That was the truth of it. He didn't want to know. Because knowing meant choosing. And choosing meant consequences he wasn't ready to face. So he did what royals had done for centuries. He let it go. He let the silence settle. He let the guard disappear into a new life. He let the guest fade into distance. And he let his wife return to breakfast a week later, composed and calm, as if nothing had ever happened. "You're feeling better," he said. "Yes, much." She poured her tea. Didn't meet his eyes. "The guard has left, I heard. You must be relieved." She paused. "Just for a moment." "I don't know what you mean." "Of course you don't." They ate in silence. And that silence became their new language. A language of things unsaid. Of footage never discussed. Of doors that remained closed. Months passed. Charles never mentioned the incident again. Neither did she. But it lived between them. In the careful way she moved through hallways. In the way he watched her when she didn't know. In the questions he didn't ask. And in the answers she didn't give. The palace carried on. Functions, duties, public appearances. Everything looked the same. But beneath the surface, something had cracked. Something small. Invisible to everyone except the two people who knew it was there. And Thomas Brennan, wherever he was, carried his own silence. A different kind. The kind that came from almost seeing something. From being close enough to truth that it had nearly destroyed him. He'd moved on. Found work in private security. A quieter life. But sometimes, late at night, he thought about that Tuesday morning. About the corridor. The Queen Consort. The way she'd looked at him. And he wondered, what had been behind that door? Who had been in that stairwell? What had he been seconds away from witnessing? He'd never know. And maybe that was mercy. Or maybe it was just another kind of prison. The kind built from questions that could never be answered. From truths that were too dangerous to speak. From loyalty that demanded blindness. Thomas had been a good guard. He'd done his job. And his job, in the end, had been to see nothing. Even when everything was right in front of him. A year later, Charles was in his study when he found the letter again. He'd been looking for something else. An old document. Notes from a meeting. But there it was. Thomas Brennan's letter. Still folded. Still locked away. Charles held it for a long time. He thought about burning it. It would be easy, clean, but he didn't. Instead, he read it again. "I'm afraid of what I didn't see." That line had stayed with him. Because it was true. The not seeing was what haunted all of them. The guard who'd turned his head at the wrong moment. The king who'd watched footage and chosen silence. The Queen Consort who'd walked out of a door and demanded erasure. All of them had decided not to see. And that decision had cost something. Charles didn't know what, exactly. Trust, maybe. Or certainty. Or the simple belief that truth mattered more than appearance. He put the letter back in the drawer. Locked it again. But this time, he didn't forget about it. It stayed with him. In quiet moments. In public ceremonies. In the careful distance that had grown between him and his wife. They still appeared together. Still smiled for cameras. Still played their roles. But something had changed. Something that the public would never see. Something that would never be written in history books or tabloid columns. A small invisible crack. The kind that only grows with time. The Queen Consort never asked about the guard again. Never mentioned the footage. Never acknowledged that anything had happened. And Charles let her pretend. Because pretending was easier than confronting. And confronting would mean admitting that he'd chosen silence over truth. That he'd protected an image instead of demanding answers. That he'd let a good man lose his career because asking questions felt too dangerous. So the silence remained. And in that silence, they all lived. The guard, in his new life, carrying questions he'd never answer. The king, in his palace, carrying footage he'd never share. The Queen Consort, in her carefully maintained composure, carrying secrets she'd never confess. And somewhere in the spaces between them, the truth existed. Not spoken. Not acknowledged. But there. Always there. Years from now, maybe decades, someone would ask Charles about that week. About the guard who was dismissed and reinstated. About the guest who left suddenly. About the tension that had settled into the palace like fog. And Charles would say what royals always said. "I don't recall." Not because he'd forgotten, but because remembering was more dangerous than forgetting. Because some truths, once spoken, couldn't be taken back. And some silences were the only thing holding everything together. Thomas Brennan never returned to the palace. He'd built a different life, a quieter one. But every now and then, when he saw news footage of the royal family, he'd pause. He'd watch the Queen Consort move through crowds, watch the king stand beside her, and he'd wonder if they ever thought about him. If they ever thought about that Tuesday morning. If they ever regretted the silence. Probably not, he'd think. Probably they'd moved on, forgotten, the way power always forgot the small people it crushed. But Thomas remembered. And sometimes that was enough. Not justice, not vindication, just the quiet knowledge that he'd been there, that he'd seen something, even if he didn't know what, even if he never would. He'd been close enough to truth that it had tried to destroy him, and he'd survived. That was its own kind of victory, small, invisible, but real. And in the palace, in a locked desk drawer, a letter remained. Unread by anyone except the man who'd received it. Kept not as evidence, but as reminder. That truth existed, even when no one spoke it. Even when everyone agreed to look away. It existed. In corridors and footage. In dismissed guards and sudden departures. In the space between what was said and what was known. And it waited. The way truth always waits. Patient, silent, undeniable. For the moment when someone would finally be brave enough to see it.